Rust-colored clouds drifted past the windshield of Jameson Kane's ancient Mark IV hover taxi as it cut through Neo-Singapore's evening sky. 20 years of ferrying passengers through the busiest spaceport in the Sol system had taught him to tune out the chaos of machinery and humanity that swirled around his cab. The neon signs and holographic advertisements that cluttered the skyways barely registered anymore, just like the constant chatter of 1,000 different languages that filtered through his cab's worn speakers. Docking Bay 94 to Central Hub. Standard fare, his dispatch unit chirped. Kane grunted in acknowledgement, banking his taxi toward the massive structure that housed incoming ships from across known space. He'd made this run countless times. Pick up some wide-eyed tourist or harried businessman, drop them at their hotel or meeting, collect the fare. Simple. Predictable, just the way he liked it. The docking bay's massive doors parted with a hydraulic hiss as Kane guided his taxi through. Inside, the cavernous space echoed with the sounds of arriving and departing vessels, maintenance drones, and the ever-present bustle of travelers. He brought the cab to a hover near the designated pickup point, scanning the crowd for his fare. That's when he saw her. She stood apart from the crowd, though she tried to blend in. Her crystalline skin caught the harsh bay lighting, creating subtle rainbow refractions that marked her as prismatic, one of the mysterious species from the Andromeda galaxy. She clutched a small bundle to her chest, wrapped in what looked like shimmering fabric that shifted colors with each movement. Kane's sensors indicated she was his fare, but something felt off. Prismatics rarely traveled alone, and never to Earth. Their kind preferred the zero-gravity habitats of deep space. Yet here she was, looking lost and frightened in a way that made Kane's veteran instincts buzz with warning. She approached his cab hesitantly, her movements liquid smooth despite her obvious anxiety. The rear door slid open with a pneumatic whoosh, and she slipped inside, still cradling her bundle. "Central Hub," Kane said gruffly, more statement than question. He caught a glimpse of her in his rearview scanner. Her crystalline features were elegant but drawn with worry, and what he had thought was fabric shifted slightly, revealing itself to be a child, its skin showing the first signs of the characteristic prismatic shimmer. "Please," she whispered, her voice carrying the musical undertones typical of her species. Quickly. Kane lifted the taxi from the bay floor, merging into the stream of traffic flowing toward the central city. Something about her demeanor made him take a more circuitous route than usual, weaving between the massive arcology towers that dominated Neo-Singapore's skyline. He was about to ask for payment when his scanner picked up movement. 3 black government vehicles entering the traffic stream behind them, their engines pushing hard to catch up. The prismatic woman tensed, clutching her child tighter. "They found us," she breathed, the words carrying a weight of desperation that made Kane's hands tighten on the controls. 20 years of following rules, keeping his head down, minding his own business. All of it screamed at him to pull over, to let whatever was happening play out without his involvement. But something in her voice, in the way she protected her child, reached past his carefully constructed walls of indifference. Kane punched the taxi's ancient accelerator, diving between levels of traffic with a skill born of decades navigating these skyways. The government vehicles followed, their sleek forms cutting through the air with predatory grace. "Hold on," he growled, throwing the taxi into a steep descent that would have triggered safety violations in any modern vehicle. But his old Mark IV had been modified over the years, its safety protocols long since bypassed in favor of performance. The woman said something in her native tongue, a cascade of crystalline sounds that seemed to make the air shimmer. Her child stirred, revealing eyes that swirled with colors Kane had never seen before. "Why are they after you?" he asked, banking hard around a maintenance platform, using the larger structure to break the pursuit vehicle's sensor lock. "My child," she said, her voice trembling. "They say he's dangerous. Different. They want to study him. But I've seen what happens to those they study. I couldn't let them." Kane nodded, understanding more than he wanted to. He'd heard rumors about government facilities, where unique specimens disappeared, never to be seen again. He'd always dismissed them as conspiracy theories, but the fear in her voice was real enough. His console lit up with warning signals as the pursuit vehicles closed in. Official channels crackled with demands to stop, threats of severe consequences. Kane ignored them all, his mind racing through decades of knowledge about Neo-Singapore's layout, its hidden places, its secrets. "I know somewhere," he said, plotting a course through his mental map of the city's forgotten corners. "But you need to trust me. Both of you." The prismatic woman's crystalline features caught the light as she nodded, her child now awake and watching Kane with those impossible eyes. He took a deep breath, then threw his taxi into a series of maneuvers that would either save them or get them all killed. The next few minutes were a blur of sharp turns, sudden drops, and near misses through maintenance tunnels and between buildings. Kane pushed his old taxi to its limits, using every trick he'd learned in 20 years of flying these routes. The government vehicles gradually fell behind, their pilots unfamiliar with the maze-like lower levels of the city. Finally, Kane guided them through a half-hidden entrance into an abandoned service station, its existence forgotten in the city's endless expansion. As the taxi's engines wound down, the silence felt heavy with unspoken questions. "We can't stay here long," Kane said, turning to face his passengers. "But I know people who might be able to help. People who disagree with how things are handled." The woman's crystalline features shifted in what he recognized as relief, though tears, like liquid diamonds, traced down her cheeks. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why help us?" Kane was quiet for a moment, looking at the child who still watched him with those mesmerizing eyes. He thought about 20 years of playing it safe, of looking the other way, of telling himself that the universe's problems weren't his concern. "Because sometimes," he said finally, "doing nothing is the same as doing wrong." As if in response, the child reached out with a tiny crystalline hand, touching the screen that separated them. Where its fingers made contact, patterns of light spread like frost on a window, forming intricate designs that seemed to pulse with life. Kane stared at the display, understanding that his life had just changed irrevocably. Whatever happened next, he was now part of something much bigger than himself. And somehow, looking at those patterns of light, he was okay with that. "Rest," he told them, activating his taxi's stealth systems. "We move again after dark. And then we figure out what comes next." The woman nodded, cradling her child close as they settled into the relative safety of the cab's rear compartment. Kane kept watch through his scanners, mind already working on their next move. The night was just beginning, and he had a feeling it was going to be a long one. The neon glow of Neo-Singapore's undercity painted strange shadows across the abandoned service station as Kane checked his sensors for the 100th time. 6 hours had passed since their escape, and the government search patterns were finally starting to thin out. The prismatic woman, who had introduced herself as Lyra, sat quietly in the back with her child, whom she called Vex. Kane's comm unit buzzed, displaying a message from an encrypted source he hadn't seen in years. The text scrolled across his screen. "Warehouse 17. Sector D6. 1 hour. Bring them." His jaw tightened. Only one person knew about that location, and he'd hoped never to need their help again. "We have to move," he announced, powering up the taxi systems. "I've got a contact. Someone who might be able to help." Lyra's crystalline features caught the dim light as she nodded. "Can they be trusted?" Kane's laugh was hollow. "Trust is complicated down here, but right now, they're our best option." The taxi lifted silently, its stealth systems masking their heat signature as they emerged from hiding. Kane kept to the maintenance tunnels and service corridors, avoiding the main skylanes where surveillance was heaviest. The Undercity was a maze of forgotten infrastructure and abandoned projects, and Kane knew every twist and turn. As they approached Sector D6, movement on his long-range scanners made him tense. "We've got company," he muttered, noting the pattern of the approaching vehicles. Not government. Something else. Hunters, Lyra whispered, her voice tight with fear. They must have hired the Obsidian Guild. Kane cursed under his breath. The Obsidian Guild was notorious. Mercenaries who specialized in retrieving valuable assets, no questions asked. Their involvement meant this was bigger than just government interest. He cut power to all non-essential systems and dropped the taxi into a narrow maintenance shaft, letting gravity do the work while minimal thrusters kept them from crashing. The pursuing vehicles shot past overhead, their sensors unable to penetrate the dense infrastructure around them. Warehouse 17 loomed ahead, a hulking relic from Neo-Singapore's early days. Kane landed the taxi in a hidden loading bay, its entrance concealed by decades of urban growth. "Stay close," he instructed, helping Lyra and Vex out of the vehicle. The warehouse interior was dim, lit only by ancient emergency strips that cast everything in a pale blue glow. Their footsteps echoed off metal walls until they reached a central clearing among the abandoned cargo containers. "You're late," a voice called from the shadows. A figure stepped forward, tall, elegant, with cybernetic augmentations that gleamed dully in the low light. "And you've brought trouble with you, old friend." "Raven," Kane acknowledged, tension evident in his voice. "Didn't expect to need your services again." Raven's augmented eyes scanned over Lyra and Vex, the mechanical irises adjusting with quiet clicks. A prismatic mother and child. "Do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into, Kane? Why don't you tell me?" Kane crossed his arms. "Since you seem to know more than you're letting on." Raven's laugh was musical, but held no warmth. "The child is a nexus. First one born in over a century. That's why they want him so badly." Lyra stepped forward, her crystalline form seeming to pulse with emotion. "How do you know this?" "Information is my currency," Raven replied. "And right now the price on information about you two is astronomical. The Obsidian Guild is just the beginning. Every major power in 3 galaxies is looking for you." Kane felt his stomach sink. "What's a nexus?" "A bridge," Lyra answered before Raven could. "Between realities. Between what is and what could be. My people, we've always had a connection to the fundamental forces of the universe. But a nexus can do more than connect. They can change things, reshape reality itself." Vex stirred in her arms, his impossible eyes fixed on Raven. Where his gaze fell, the air seemed to ripple. And for a moment, Kane saw multiple versions of the warehouse overlaid on each other, some pristine and new, others completely ruined, all existing simultaneously. "Fascinating," Raven breathed, her augmented eyes whirring as they tried to process what they were seeing. "And now you understand why every power in known space wants to control them. Imagine it. The ability to choose the most favorable reality from an infinite number of possibilities." "He's just a child," Kane protested, though his voice wavered as he watched reality fluctuate around them. "He's the most powerful being in the galaxy," Raven corrected. "And he's currently in my warehouse, bringing every hunter and government agent within 100 light years down on our heads." As if on cue, Kane's sensors began blaring warnings. Multiple vehicles approaching. Military grade. And something bigger. Coming in from orbit. Raven's expression hardened. "They're here sooner than expected. Kane, you need to make a choice right now. Walk away, let me handle this my way, or commit to something that's going to change your life forever." Kane looked at Lyra and Vex, remembering the patterns of light the child had created in his taxi. He thought about 20 years of playing it safe, of watching the powerful prey on the weak, of telling himself it wasn't his problem. "What's your plan?" he asked Raven. A smile curved across her augmented features. "There's a ship. Experimental. Fast enough to outrun anything they can throw at us. But getting to it won't be easy." "When is it ever?" Kane muttered. He turned to Lyra. "Your choice. We can try Raven's plan, or I can get you out of here. Try to find another way." Lyra's crystalline features shifted in what might have been a smile. "You've already risked everything for us. We trust you. The warehouse shook as something massive passed overhead. Raven's augments flashed as she accessed her systems. Decision time's over. They're here. Kane nodded, his hand finding the ancient blaster at his hip. Show us to this ship of yours. As they followed Raven deeper into the warehouse, through hidden passages she revealed with coded gestures, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial. Raven knew too much, was too prepared for this situation. But with orbital ships moving into position above them and ground forces closing in, they were out of options and out of time. Whatever game Raven was playing, whatever secret she was keeping, would have to wait. The night was far from over, and Kane had a feeling the real challenges were just beginning. Deep beneath Warehouse 17, Raven led them through a labyrinth of tunnels that predated Neo-Singapore itself. The walls were lined with technology that seemed to shift between ancient and cutting edge with each passing moment. An effect of Vex's presence, Kane realized, as the child's powers continued to blur the lines between possible realities. The ship is in a quantum dock, Raven explained as they descended. It exists in multiple states simultaneously until we need it. Makes it impossible to track or detect. A distant explosion rocked the tunnel, sending dust cascading from above. Kane's hand tightened on his blaster. They're getting closer. They can't detect us down here, Raven assured them, her cybernetic eyes glowing in the darkness. The entire facility is shielded by weight. She stopped abruptly, her augments whirring. Something's wrong. Before anyone could react, the tunnel ahead of them lit up with harsh floodlights. Armored figures emerged from concealed positions, their weapons trained on the group. At their center stood a tall figure in an immaculate white uniform, Commander Isaiah Wells of the Terran Defense Force. Raven, Wells said smoothly, right on schedule. Kane's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. He spun toward Raven, but she was already stepping away from them, her expression unreadable. I'm sorry, Kane, she said quietly, but the price was too high to ignore. You betrayed us. Lyra's voice carried notes of crystal breaking, her form shimmering with distress. Wells stepped forward, his perfect posture and measured movements speaking of absolute confidence. No one's betraying anyone. We're here to help. That child represents the greatest scientific discovery in human history. We can protect him, study him, help him reach his full potential. You mean weaponize him? Kane growled, positioning himself between Wells and his charges. Such a limited perspective. Wells sighed. We're standing on the brink of understanding the fundamental nature of reality itself. Think of the possibilities. We could prevent wars before they start, cure diseases before they spread, reshape entire worlds to better serve their populations. As he spoke, Vex began to glow, his impossible eyes fixed on Wells. The air around them shimmered, and Kane saw flickers of other realities, ones where Wells spoke truth, others where his words masked horrors beyond imagination. The effect was dizzying, nauseating. The child is showing you, isn't he? Lyra's voice was stronger now, showing you all the possibilities, all the consequences. Wells's confident smile faltered slightly. That's precisely why we need to study him. Control these abilities before they... Before they what? Kane interrupted. Before he shows us things you don't want us to see. The commander's expression hardened. Take them. But as the armored soldiers moved forward, Vex's glow intensified. Reality seemed to fracture around them, showing glimpses of countless possible outcomes. Kane saw himself dying, surviving, fleeing, fighting, all happening simultaneously. Stop, Wells commanded, but his voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once. Contain the child. In the chaos, Kane felt a hand grab his arm. It was Raven, her augmented eyes spinning wildly as they tried to process the fractured reality around them. The quantum dock, she whispered urgently. 3 levels down. The code is 7239 Alpha 0. I'm sorry, Kane. I had to make them think I was helping them. It was the only way to get you this far. Before he could respond, she shoved him toward a section of wall that seemed to phase between solid and transparent. Go. I'll hold them here. Kane grabbed Lyra's arm and ran for the wall, praying they were moving toward one of the realities where it was an opening rather than solid stone. They passed through as if through water, emerging into another tunnel as reality stabilized behind them. Why? Lyra asked as they ran. Why would she help us after betraying us? Kane's mind raced back to his history with Raven, years of operating in Neo-Singapore's shadows. Because that's how she survives, playing all sides, helping everyone and no one. But when it really matters, he shook his head. She chooses her moment. They found the quantum dock exactly where Raven had said it would be. The ship before them was unlike anything Kane had ever seen. Its hull seemed to exist in multiple states at once, its form fluid and constantly shifting. As Kane input the code into the dock's control panel, alarms began blaring above them. The sounds of pursuit echoed through the tunnels. Can you fly it? Lyra asked as they rushed aboard. Kane settled into the pilot's seat, his hands hovering over controls that seemed to rearrange themselves every few seconds. I flew everything from cargo haulers to military dropships before I became a taxi driver. This is something else entirely. Vex reached out from his mother's arms, touching the ship's console. Instantly, the shifting controls stabilized, arranging themselves in a configuration Kane recognized. Smart kid, he muttered, firing up the engines. Hold on tight. The quantum dock's doors opened to reveal not the tunnels they'd descended through, but open space. Somehow, the dock had shifted them beyond Neo-Singapore's atmosphere entirely. Behind them, military vessels were already moving to intercept. They're going to track us, Lyra said, worry evident in her crystalline voice. Kane smiled grimly. That's the beauty of a quantum ship. We're not just in one place. We're in every possible place we could be. They'll have to choose which reality to follow. As if understanding, Vex glowed brighter, his power merging with the ship's quantum field. On their sensors, their single ship suddenly appeared as dozens, hundreds, each taking a different path through space. Let them chase shadows, Kane said, plotting a course toward the galactic rim. We need to find somewhere safe, somewhere they won't think to look. Lyra held Vex closer, her crystalline form catching the light of distant stars. There is a place, a sanctuary my people built long ago, hidden in the space between realities. But reaching it will be impossible. Kane finished for her, noting the growing fleet of pursuit vessels splitting up to chase their quantum echoes. Good thing we've got the right ship. And the right navigator. He nodded toward Vex, who was watching the stars with those reality-bending eyes. The quantum ship slipped through space like a dream through the mind, leaving confusion and possibility in its wake. They weren't just running anymore. They were heading somewhere with purpose, with hope. But as Neo-Singapore dwindled behind them, Kane couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was just beginning. Somewhere out there was a sanctuary, a safe haven for a child who could reshape reality itself. And somehow, a simple taxi driver had become its protector. The quantum ship phased through reality like a fish through water, leaving ripples in the fabric of space-time. Behind them, the pursuing fleet had split into smaller groups, each chasing a different quantum echo of their vessel. Kane's hands moved steadily over the controls, which had stabilized thanks to Vex's influence. They're deploying quantum trackers, Lyra warned, her crystalline form reflecting the cascade of data streaming across the ship's displays. Military-grade technology designed to lock onto specific quantum signatures. Kane grimaced. Can they track us through the quantum field? They can track all our possible positions, she explained. Eventually, they'll be able to predict where we'll converge. As if to confirm her words, a massive cruiser materialized ahead of them, its weapon systems charging. Kane banked hard, shifting through several quantum states at once. The cruiser's weapons fire passed through empty space, their ship existing simultaneously in dozens of possible locations. Vex stirred in his mother's arms, his impossible eyes fixed on the space ahead. Where he looked, reality seemed to thin, showing glimpses of what lay between the normal dimensions of space. "He's showing us the way," Lyra whispered. "To the sanctuary." Kane nodded, following the distortions in reality that Vex was revealing. "How much further?" "The sanctuary exists in a fold between dimensions," Lyra explained. "My people built it eons ago, when we first discovered our connection to the quantum nature of reality. But reaching it," she hesitated, "the journey will be dangerous." Another cruiser appeared, then another. The quantum trackers were working, narrowing down their possible locations. Kane's tactical display showed more ships approaching from multiple vectors. "Dangerous is better than captured," Kane muttered, pushing the quantum drive harder. The ship's sensors screamed warnings as they approached a region of space that seemed to fold in on itself. Suddenly, their comm system crackled to life. "Kane." Commander Wells's voice filled the bridge. "You're approaching a quantum anomaly that will tear your ship apart. Stand down. We can still resolve this peacefully." "Peaceful like your containment facilities." Kane shot back. "Like your experiments." "You don't understand what's at stake," Wells insisted. "That child could be the key to humanity's ascension. Think of the possibilities if we could control the very fabric of reality." "He's not a weapon." Lyra's voice rang with crystal clarity. "He's a child, and you'll never understand the difference." Kane cut the communication as they approached the quantum fold. The ship's hull groaned as reality itself seemed to resist their passage. Behind them, the pursuing fleet opened fire, their weapons creating a web of destructive energy designed to cut off all possible escape routes. "Hold on," Kane warned, pushing the ship directly toward the fold. "This is going to get rough." The quantum field around their ship flared as they hit the boundary between normal space and whatever lay beyond. Alarms blared as the hull stressed under forces it was never designed to withstand. Through it all, Vex remained calm, his glow intensifying as he helped guide them through. Reality shattered around them like broken glass, each fragment showing a different possibility, a different outcome. Kane saw versions where they made it through, others where they were destroyed, still others where they never tried at all. The effect was disorienting, nauseating. "Stay focused," Lyra urged, her voice seeming to come from multiple directions at once. "Vex will show us the right path." Kane gritted his teeth, following the child's guidance as they pushed deeper into the quantum fold. The pursuing ships fell away, unable to follow them into this space between spaces, but their victory was short-lived. "Something's wrong," Lyra said suddenly, her form flickering with anxiety. "The fold, it's unstable." Kane saw it too. The quantum field around them was beginning to collapse, reality trying to reassert itself. If they were caught in the collapse, they would be torn apart at the quantum level. "How much further to the sanctuary?" he asked, fighting to keep the ship steady as reality buckled around them. "Close," Lyra answered. "But," she hesitated, "the sanctuary can only be reached by those of my kind. The quantum transition would destroy any other form of life." Kane understood what she wasn't saying. He couldn't go with them. Not all the way. "Then we need to get you as close as possible," he said firmly, pushing aside the weight of what that meant. "Show me where." Vex reached out, touching the console again. The ship's sensors revealed a point ahead where the quantum fold seemed to stabilize, creating a natural harbor in the chaos. Kane guided them toward it, acutely aware of the reality collapse spreading behind them. The ship's hull was beginning to phase in and out of existence, the quantum stresses becoming too much for it to handle. They reached the stable point just as the ship's quantum field began to fail. Through the view screen, Kane could see something that defied description. A structure that existed in all possible states at once, yet was somehow more real than anything he'd ever seen. "The sanctuary," Lyra breathed. Kane turned to them, seeing the same realization in Lyra's crystalline features. This was goodbye. "You'll be safe there?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Lyra nodded. They cannot follow us inside. The quantum transition would destroy them. She paused. Just as it would destroy you. Kane managed a smile. Then this is where we part ways. He looked at Vex, who was watching him with those reality-bending eyes. Take care of your mother, kid. Vex reached out, touching Kane's hand. In that moment, Kane saw everything. All the possible futures, all the paths not taken, all the choices that had led to this moment. It was overwhelming, beautiful, and terrifying all at once. Thank you, Lyra said softly, for everything. Kane nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He watched as they made their way to the airlock, their forms already beginning to shift as they prepared for the quantum transition. Kane, Lyra called back one last time. In every reality we saw, in every possible future, you always chose to help us. Remember that. Then they were gone, stepping into the quantum void toward the sanctuary. Kane turned back to the controls, noting that the ship's quantum field was nearly depleted. Behind him, the collapse was accelerating, and ahead lay a choice. He could try to make it back through the closing fold, return to his simple life, or he could use the last of the quantum field to ensure no one could follow Lyra and Vex, even if it meant. Kane smiled, thinking of all those possible futures Vex had shown him. In every one of them, he had chosen to help. Why should this reality be any different? He turned the ship toward the approaching collapse and pushed the engines to full power. Behind him, the sanctuary and its inhabitants faded into quantum possibility, safe from those who would exploit them. In the end, it wasn't even a difficult choice. In the quantum chaos between realities, Kane's ship blazed like a dying star. The quantum field generators screamed as he pushed them beyond their limits, using the last of their power to collapse the fold behind him. With each passing moment, the path to the sanctuary grew more unstable, more impossible to navigate. Through the dissolving viewscreen, he caught glimpses of other realities, worlds where he had never picked up Lyra and Vex, worlds where he had surrendered them to Wells, worlds where none of this had ever happened. But in this reality, in this moment, he knew he had made the right choice. The ship's computer blared warnings in multiple languages as the quantum field began to fail completely. Behind him, the collapse was gaining speed, erasing all traces of the path they had taken. Ahead, normal space beckoned, but reaching it would require more power than they had left. Warning: quantum field integrity critical. Structural collapse imminent. Kane ignored the warnings, his hand steady on the controls. He had one last card to play. Every quantum ship had a failsafe, a last resort option that he had discovered in the ship's specs during their flight. By overloading the quantum core, he could create a massive disruption in the fabric of reality, enough to seal the fold permanently. No one would ever find the sanctuary. Lyra and Vex would be safe. His fingers moved across the console, inputting the commands that would trigger the overload. As he worked, his comm system suddenly crackled to life. Kane. Commander Wells's voice cut through the chaos. Our sensors show you're preparing to overload your quantum core. Stand down. The resulting disruption will tear you apart at the molecular level. Kane laughed despite himself. That's kind of the point, Commander. Think about what you're doing. Wells pressed. We could work together. Your experience with the child, combined with our resources, we could change everything. That's exactly what I'm afraid of, Kane replied. Through the quantum chaos, he could see the military vessels holding position at the edge of normal space, unwilling to risk the increasingly unstable conditions. You're throwing your life away for nothing. Wells's voice rose with frustration. They're aliens, Kane. Different from us in ways you can't even comprehend. Kane thought of Vex's impossible eyes, of Lyra's quiet strength, of the trust they had placed in him. Maybe that's exactly why they need protecting. From people who can't comprehend differences without wanting to control them. His fingers finished the sequence. The quantum core began to pulse with energy, its containment fields already starting to buckle. Warning: core overload in 60 seconds. Quantum field collapse imminent. Emergency protocols recommended. Kane leaned back in his pilot's seat, watching through the failing viewscreen as reality itself began to tear apart around him. The quantum disruption would do more than just seal the fold. It would erase all quantum traces of their journey, making it impossible for anyone to recreate their path. 30 seconds to core overload. He thought about his life. 20 years of playing it safe, of looking the other way, of telling himself that the universe's problems weren't his concern, until 2 passengers had changed everything. 15 seconds. Through the chaos of dissolving reality, Kane caught one last glimpse of the sanctuary, existing in all possibilities at once. For a moment, he thought he saw Vex watching him through the quantum void, those reality-bending eyes filled with understanding. 10 seconds. Kane. Wells's voice came one last time, quieter now. Why? Because sometimes, Kane replied, watching as the quantum core reached critical levels. The right thing to do is also the hardest. 5 seconds. He closed his eyes, at peace with his choice. In every reality Vex had shown him, he had chosen to help. This reality would be no different. Core overload initiated. The quantum core detonated in a silent explosion that rippled through multiple dimensions at once. Reality itself buckled and warped, sealing the fold permanently. The military vessels were forced to retreat as the quantum disruption spread, erasing all traces of the sanctuary's location from existence. In the aftermath, as the quantum distortions settled and reality stabilized, Commander Wells stood on his bridge, staring at the space where Kane's ship had been. His sensors showed no trace of the quantum fold, no hint of where the prismatic woman and her child had gone. It was as if that entire section of space had never existed. But somewhere, in a realm between realities, in a sanctuary that existed in all possibilities at once, a child with impossible eyes looked out into the quantum void. In his mind, he held the memory of a simple taxi driver who had chosen to help, who had given everything to protect those different from himself. And in every reality, in every possibility, that choice would be remembered. In Neo Singapore, life continued. The skyways filled with traffic, the neon signs blaze, and new taxi drivers ferried passengers through the chaos of the spaceport. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between fares, the older drivers would tell stories about Kane. The driver who disappeared into quantum space, who chose to help when others looked away. They say that on quiet nights, if you look carefully at the stars, you can see quantum ripples in space, echoes of a choice that transcended reality itself. A reminder that sometimes the most human thing we can do is help those who are different from us, no matter the cost. And somewhere, in every possible reality, that truth lives on.